2.4 G4K 174 horsepower. The junior gasoline engine of the second-generation Santa Fe is the controversial 2.4-liter 4. Let us immediately note that this engine appeared only after restyling. This engine is considered very controversial. It was with it that the history of liner rotation began. The G4K engine became unusable literally up to 100,000 kilometers. But that's not even surprising. A good half of G4K engines have run 300,000 kilometers without any problems and don't think about breaking down. There's a lot of advice that for long service life this engine needs low viscosity oils such as 0 watts minus 20, 5 watts minus 20. There is a version that the G4K engine turns the liners due to a jammed oil pump pressure relief valve. They are fighting this radically. They remove the block of balancer shafts with the oil pump built into it and install in its place a pump from a 2-liter G4KD engine. In this case, you will have to replace 1.5 dozen parts, from the crankshaft gear, timing chain, oil pump chain to the pan and various bolts and seals. But still, such a replacement will be more than 5 times cheaper than engine repair. By the way, the standard oil pump on the G4K is defective. Oil pressure is created by helical gears that connect both balancer shafts. And later, since 2012, this motor received the so-called golden liners from the assembly line. Their coating has this shade, which resists wear very poorly even with more or less normal oil pressure. In general, everything is not easy with the 2.4-liter 4 G4K. In general, it is worth monitoring the actual oil pressure either periodically, or installing a separate pressure gauge and bringing it into the cabin. The pressure at idle should be more than 2 bar, and at 3,000 revolutions per minute the pressure should go to the cutoff, reaching 6 bar and above. If the actual pressure is lower, then resolve the issue quickly before G4K turns the connecting rod bearings. 2.7 V6 G6EA 189 horsepower. The 2.7-liter engine under the hood of the Santa Fe is considered the most reliable and least capricious. For this he is forgiven for his gluttony. The alloy manifold of this engine has 6 swirl flaps. They are steel, screwed to a common axis. So, the screws of these dampers have the unpleasant property of unscrewing. Then the screws and the valves themselves fly into the cylinders, causing serious damage to the engine. It even goes as far as replacing valves, pistons, and even the engine as a whole. However, before the final tearing off, a metallic rustling or clicking sound will be heard. This is one or more dampers scraping against the manifold. In this case, you need to immediately remove the intake manifold, unscrew the flap screws and fasten them again using a thread locker. Just in case, this procedure should be repeated every 80,000 kilometers. Otherwise, the usual little things happen to this engine, such as oil leakage on the oil seals, contamination of the damper. Minor troubles are caused by the VCG system, the adsorber valve and the drive of the same dampers. By the way, there are no hydraulic compensators in the valve drive of this engine. The timing belt of this engine needs to be changed every 120,000 kilometers or every 8 years, preferably with a pump. Replacing a timing belt is quite laborious. In general, with normal maintenance, this engine easily runs 500,000 kilometers. 3.3 V6 G6DB 242 horsepower. 3.5 V6 G6DC 280 horsepower. Santa Fe's with 3.3 and 3.5-liter engines are very rare. Such cars were imported from the USA. In addition to the huge fuel consumption, these engines are not happy with their oil consumption and the short life of their timing chains. And operation on gas, if the machine has been converted, requires regular checking of the thermal clearances of the valves, because there are no hydraulic compensators in these engines. 2.2 CRDI D4EB 150 horsepower. 2.2 CRDI D4HB 197 horsepower. Diesel engines under the hood of the Santa Fe are mainly represented by 2.2-liter engines. These are almost identical motors. Essentially, they differ in generations of common rail system and turbines. Restyled version with 197 horsepower. It drives great and is very economical, but its Bosch CP4 fuel pump is no gift. It easily shreds small chips if you drive on reserve fuel. Those short-term airing starts the process of self-destruction and contamination of the entire fuel system with steel powder. And if the piezoelectric element fails, you will either have to buy new ones or look for a very good option at a disassembly site. In this regard, the pre-styling 2.2 CRDI will be more loyal and cheaper to repair. Its CP3 pump is durable and relatively simple. The injectors are completely repairable. For both engines, the crankshaft damper pulley requires attention because unexpectedly breaks on the rubber damper. The original pulley, 231242F010, costs about $100. These diesel engines also suffer from oil starvation. which occurs due to clogging of the oil intake with soot inclusions. A lot of these fragments, similar to burnt oil, clog the mesh. Very quickly, such an unpleasant impurity appears in the oil if the fireproof washers under the injectors burn out. Due to problems with oil pressure, the turbocharger wears out prematurely and wear appears on the camshafts. Often it also ends in dry friction of the pistons with deep scuffing of the cylinders or banal rotation of the liners. It is worth removing the pan every 3 to 4 oil changes and assessing the cleanliness of the oil intake screen or periodically measuring the oil pressure in the lubrication system. F4A 42 4-speed automatic transmission, F5A 51 5-street automatic transmission. Before restyling, a Hyundai Santa Fe was equipped with a 4-speed gearbox, automatic with a 2.7-liter engine, and the rest were paired with a 5-speed automatic transmission. These transmissions are of Japanese origin. They were developed by Mitsubishi engineers. They are quite durable. There are many cases when they last 500,000 kilometers before overhaul. This is possible with careful operation and replacing the ATF every 60,000 kilometers. The filter can be changed after removing the pan. By the way, these automatic transmissions are designed quite simply. Some owners manage to rebuild them themselves. It is enough to replace worn clutches. The valve body usually does not wear out. A6HF 16 automatic transmission, A6LF 16 automatic transmission. After restyling, Santa Fe switched to 6-speed automatic machines, which also please with resources and do not create problems. However, it is impossible to get to their filter without completely disassembling the automatic transmission. Despite this, ATF also needs to be changed every 60,000 kilometers. In the transmission of restyled Santa Fe's with all-wheel drive, there is an important weak point that you definitely need to know about and preventively protect it from possible problems. We'll tell you about it soon. Over long runs, problems will arise due to the fact that the ventilation system has forgotten how to properly regulate the temperature of the supplied air, or a plastic squeak will be heard from the depths of the central panel. This all indicates that the air damper servo drive is jammed or the potentiometer in their position sensor is worn out. You will need to replace one of the two drives. 971603K000 may cost $35. All restyled all-wheel drive Santa Fe's have a weak point in the transmission, which began to manifest itself after running about 100,000 kilometers. The bottom line is that a bevel gear transfer case is screwed to the front right of the gearbox. So, the spline connection of the gearbox shafts, the bevel gear in the right drive, which passes through the transfer case, do not have lubrication from the conveyor. In addition, the seals that seal this connection are poorly made and do not even protect against condensation that accumulates between the housings of the gearbox and bevel gear. In general, a long time ago it all ended with the heavily rusted splines breaking off at one point. When it became clear that this would happen on every all-wheel drive Santa Fe, people began removing the transfer case to change the seals and fill the splines on the transmission side with grease. And the fact that the splines are already badly worn is indicated by strong play in the drive shaft. In this case, you need to remove the transfer case and change its input shaft, 47,332 to 39,300, because as a rule, the slots on it wear out a lot. This shaft costs $170. If the splines at the exit from the differential housing, 45822-3B850, are worn out, then in addition to the work you will have to pay another $140. By the way, it wouldn't be a bad idea to change the oil in the bevel gearbox, transfer case and in the rear gearbox. All you need is 1 liter of gear oil with a viscosity of 75 watts minus 90. Pre-restyling cars are not in danger of corrosion of the splines at the outlet of the automatic transmission because they are lubricated with oil from the transmission itself. In restyled cars, the splines are not lubricated with anything until the owners or servicemen do this. If the Santa Fe is equipped with all-wheel drive, then there is a wet multi-plate clutch in the rear gear housing at the front. It consists of steel and friction discs that are tightly compressed under the influence of a magnetic field. There's an electromagnet inside on the cardan shaft side. The clutches on pre-restyling and updated second-generation Santa Fe's are slightly different, but interchangeable. Their manufacturer is Borg-Warner. All-wheel drive clutches are weak. During aggressive off-road driving they overheat and the friction discs burn out. Due to excessive overheating, the coupling may even jam. The tiny volume of oil the housing contains 150 grams of special oil, contains combustion products of the friction layer. Owners often find out that the rear axle does not engage when it is needed. In addition to wear and tear, with runs of more than 150,000 kilometers, oil can leak from the coupling both outward, towards the cardan, and into the rear gearbox. These couplings can and should be serviced. To begin with, once every 100,000 kilometers you need to remove them, open the housing and at least change the oil. The original 02200-00130 costs over $200 per liter. It can be replaced with a much cheaper analog from Mobil, LT71141. The main thing is that the oil must be synthetic. No mineral water will fit here. When changing the oil, you will have to change the flange, front bearing and oil seal. They're sold together in a repair kit, 47850394100F, for $50. If during disassembly it turns out that the coupling is seriously worn out, then a restored one can be purchased at specialized workshops in exchange for your own. A new clutch, $47,800 to $39,300, costs over $1,700. In general, this is a rather sore spot in the Santa Fe, so you need to pay attention to it when purchasing and using it. It is not so rare that play and vibration appear in the right axle shaft, which is connected through the intermediate shaft. The intermediate shaft rests on a bearing. Hyundai Santa Fe's we had to change it to $49,563 to $37,700. During this operation, the removed intermediate shaft, 495602B150, may reveal worn splines at its connection to the right CV joint, 495002B510. There may be significant play in this connection. Few owners are willing to pay $400 for an intermediate shaft and right-hand drive. Craftsmen remove the backlash as follows. Drill a hole in the intermediate shaft from the tripod side and cut a thread for a hardened M10 bolt. Accordingly, make a hole for this bolt in the tripod cup body, place a washer under the bolt and connect both shafts. The cardan shaft is maintenance-free and, in principle, serves well. The rear axle coupling withstands off-road torture much less well. Neither the crosspieces nor the suspension bearing are sold separately in the original. All this can be purchased from substitutes. The suspension of the Hyundai Santa Fe pleases with its maintainability. All front control arm components are sold and replaced separately. The original ball joint, 5453003B000, each of 2 silent blocks, 54551-2B000, 54584-2B000, they all cost $7 and last more than 100,000 kilometers. The support bearings of the front struts last approximately the same amount of time, 546124000, they are sold for $25. Stabilizer links $15 each. Wheel bearings for the Santa Fe come with the hubs. For all-wheel drive versions they are the same all around, 517502B000, and each costs $500. Decent substitutes are 4 times cheaper. Original rear wheel bearings 527502B100 for single-wheel drive versions are much cheaper, $150. The rear wheels are suspended on 4 levers. The silent blocks of each of them are also sold separately. Their price ranges from $10 to $30. In the second generation, Santa Fe turned out to be bolder than its predecessor. The design has changed beyond recognition, especially since Hyundai did not have any obvious signature features at that time. The length of the body increased by as much as 17 centimeters, and rare 7-seater versions appeared. In general, Hyundai offered a lot of car for reasonable money. The Santa Fe platform is a typical crossover. No frame or rigidly connected all-wheel drive. The body metal is well protected from corrosion. Rust that appears under the paint is primarily a sign of use in salty winters. If corrosion is not visible from the outside, then it is worth looking for it on the lower edges and edges of the doors. Here all attention should be paid to the rolled seam. Likewise, the edge of the rear door can become rusty. Moisture and reagents often affect the rear fenders, those areas to which the rear bumper is attached. In wheel arches, rotten corrosion forms around the technological holes,